been talking about how the arrival of a new baby is such a wonderful experience for a couple to share. And yet, this joy and excitement can be accompanied by an adjustment period. Sexual intimacies are often affected. With us today is sex therapist Jane Tier, and she's joined by Marsha and Lennie Cohen, who are the proud parents of a 2.5-year-old, but really did go through this adjustment time. You're willing to share this story, Marsha, so tell us what happened to you.
Well, the first thing that happened was I was very affected by my episiotomy. It really bothered me that that had happened. And so I was particularly sensitive and I didn't want to be touched. I was very in touch with my biological function as a woman. I nursed my daughter, and somehow sex seemed irrelevant, or it wasn't very pleasurable. So I kind of avoided it. And it was difficult whenever we would finally get around to it. Sort of, I was squeamish, and I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't relaxed, and so mostly I tried to avoid it.
Lennie, was this a different Marsha than before the birth of your daughter?
Oh yes, quite. I like being taken care of in all areas, and when the baby came along, it just seemed as if I wasn't being taken care of like I like being taken care of, particularly in the subject sex. The more she did not want it, and the more she came up with a reason why not to have it, the more I wanted it. So it kind of like caused some friction in the house.
Jane, is this typical? Does a woman become aware that there's a life depending on her and go from a sexual person to a kind of a mothering person? Is that what happens?
Many women do. It's very common. It doesn't happen to all women, but it happens to many women. And actually, the most painful things for a couple is not really the change in the sex life, but the feeling that there's no more intimacy at all. And it's a very important time for couples to realize that sex and intimacy are separate. And you can really work on a new kind of intimacy, even if for a while you have to leave sexuality aside. They're not necessarily linked.
Did you feel guilty about this, Marsha?
No, not at all at the time. I felt very justified. I felt my daughter took so much, there's so much care and so much, you know, in the middle of the night feedings, and it seemed like every spare moment I had, I wanted to spend it myself, on myself, like taking a bath or reading something by myself. And I felt that he should take care of himself, and he really needs to be pampered. And it's true, you do need to discover a new way of being intimate without, which we have discovered. That's how we've come out of it. I mean, I do pamper him more now, but at the time I felt very justified, and that I needed pampering, and that he should take care of himself. If he only had himself to take care of, what was the big deal?
And you had one person, and you didn't want to be mother to two. Did you know that? Did you feel like you were shoved out of Marsha's life, Lennie?
Oh, absolutely. I felt totally abandoned. I thought it would not be that way at all prior to having the baby. I had different outlooks entirely. I just thought that if anybody was going to be jealous, she would be jealous of my relationship with the baby. But as it turns out, I was jealous of them.
How did you finally start to work through all of this?
Well, I think after Leah was 2, she became more independent, and she could play by herself for a long time, and I felt like I had time for myself again. And you know, I started caring about how I looked more, and I really looked at how I missed him, that I wanted a relationship back with him. And so I just started just sleeping together side by side is very important to me now, and she was sleeping between us often.
Oh boy.
And so I realize how much I really love having him next to me.
Is this a typical story, Jane, or are there other things that happen to perhaps some that are watching us that didn't happen to Marsha and Lennie?
This is fairly typical. You know, there might be different circumstances, different feelings, but the result, the change in the female sexual appetite, is really common. And the thing that I always encourage couples to explore at this time, rather than trying to force sexual activity, after all, sex is about pleasure, is to discover other ways of being intimate. If, like Marsha said, just sleeping side by side can be very intimate. Just a hug, just holding hands, just 5 minutes of lovely conversation. You don't need to give up intimacy and sharing, even if you're in a sexual lull.
Nursing is very important to an awful lot of mothers.
Yeah.
Is it augmented? Is this problem augmented at all because of nursing?
It tends to be, but it's augmented for emotional reasons. There's no biological reason why nursing would augment it, but most nursing mothers do feel more their body is really for the baby, and there are logical reasons why they'd feel it.
One woman said that she talked to friends, and that friends told her, it's all right, you'll find comfort in other ways, and you might not feel as sexual, but other things will offset that. That sounds like a compromise to me, is it?
It's a compromise if it stays that way forever. It's not a compromise if that's a brief period that you go through.
But it was 2 years for both of you. Why didn't you really sit down and honestly say, we have a problem and this is it?
Well, I'd like to answer that. First of all, we did. Okay, that's the answer to the question. But actually what we learned, at least what I think Marsha would agree, is that we learned how to tell the truth to Leah. And that's where the answer lied for us. In other words, when we started to feel that, okay, now it's time to start to get more intimate with each other, what I did was I started to tell Leah,
your daughter,
my daughter, I started to say, okay, it's time for you to go to sleep, and it's time, your mother and father would like to have some privacy, and we'd like to spend some time alone. She started to realize that. She started to get that. And out of that, it kind of, it left us to be intimate.
Were you ever afraid, Marsha, that Lennie would go elsewhere for sex?
No.
You were really caught up in the mothering thing and didn't feel guilty or any of that. I wonder, Jane, do a lot of women feel that way?
Many do. Many do, and as with Marsha and Lennie, it lasts at the most a couple of years and usually shorter.
Is this a time then to really look at as a bonding in a different way as a couple?
Yes, in fact, most couples don't realize until they have a child how much it affects every aspect of life, and it truly does. And to think that it would not affect the sensual aspect of life is actually a silly assumption.
So what are the things to do? Communicate, talk about it, and live through it?
Well, more than that, look for ways of actually feeling and expressing intimacy that are not necessarily sexual. So you don't have to give up intimacy and sharing and warm feelings while you're still searching to revive sexual interest.
Marsha and Lennie, yes, no, go ahead.
Just we had been advised to set up a date every Saturday night and go on a date together. And we didn't do that.
And you should have.
And we really should have. Every time we did, we said that we really need this, and we should do it every week, and we didn't.
Now you're doing it every week, and that's good. Marsha,
We have a date tonight.
Good, have a good time. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Jane. To your very